Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. It's Sunday the 31st of August and my name is Brian Liddy. On the programme this week we're delighted to be joined live in the studio by Chris Stephens. Good afternoon, Chris, how are you?
Good afternoon, Brian, very well, thank you.
Thank you for coming in on a Sunday afternoon, really appreciate it. And you're going to have to be leaving early, I believe, but anyway, and we're also delighted to welcome Huw Marshall for Talking Wales. Good afternoon, Huw. How is it where you are?
It's not raining, which is good news.
Oh, and last week was it sunny south of France?
I was really lucky. I was in near La Rochelle, but I'm home now.
And we were lucky to have you join us from there, so thank you again coming in today. Today's Middle East update, to begin with that. At least 63,371 Palestinians have been killed and 159,835 have been wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023. This week, 5 more journalists were killed by Israel in a targeted attack on the Nasser hospital in southern Gaza as Netanyahu steps up his plans to occupy the Gaza Strip. As the attacks continue, Tony Blair met with Jared Kushner at the White House to discuss how the Strip would be run in the future, post-war, that is. Chris, can I come to you first on that? The atrocity about the journalists that were killed, there was a strike on a hospital, some journalists went to cover the strike and they were struck, and the first responders were struck and killed. I mean, surely that's a definition of atrocity.
Well, it is a definition of atrocity, and last week I was at an event at Buchanan Street Steps. It was organised by the National Union of Journalists, because I think this is a very serious issue of journalists being killed who are doing nothing other than reporting the news. So it is an atrocity, it's a continued atrocity, and it is genocide now, and we're getting into a situation in which I think the UK government now has to step up. It has to recognise Palestine, and it has to seriously take the view that there should be no arms sales whatsoever to the state of Israel, because sadly the public out there, when they see that parts are still being sent to Israel and sold to Israel, will take the view that we have a part in this, and I don't think that should happen. And frankly, this is not my name, and I think the majority of people in Scotland and elsewhere in the UK don't think it should be in their name either.
Thank you, Chris. And Huw, what do you think? What's Tony Blair up to in Washington, do you think?
Who knows? But as you was just saying now, it's the fact that journalists are being targeted. The IDF just used the line that, they were all Hamas operatives and, we were targeting Hamas. But, it's clear, and it's been clear for months now, that they're just trying to, eradicate the people, the Palestinians who live on the Gaza Strip. And, they want to push them out, displace them, starve them. And, enough is enough. I'm getting fed up now of David Lammy with his strong words and no actions. I saw that they sort of banned Israeli officials from attending an arms fair. But Israeli companies could still, sell their wares or whatever. So, I don't know, it's like I say, we say this on a regular basis. Growing up, United Nations used to be able to do things. It's now an empty vessel. The fact that the US, trying to block people coming to the UN from Palestine just speaks volumes. I genuinely just despair.
Thank you, Huw. Chris, just really quickly, because we're out of time on this, do you think Tony Blair in Washington got something to do with Trump's plan for the shiny Gaza Strip post-war, the paradise?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but if Tony Blair's involved, I'm nervous, I have to say. He was supposed to be a peace envoy in the old days for the Middle East, wasn't he? He's not done a good job about that. I'm really, really nervous now about the British state, America, and Israel and how they see things going forward. It's not something I would support in terms of trying to make Gaza some sort of sunny holiday resort for the rich. People are living there, and they should be allowed to live there, and that's what self-determination is all about as far as I'm concerned, and that's why I think that we need to take a strong view in demonstrating our support to the people of Palestine. It's the people of Palestine who we support, and that there should be full state recognition, and that's the line that we have to keep holding Israel, America and the UK to. And obviously, as Huw mentioned, the United Nations. Now, there are votes coming up in the United Nations, and we should be, all of us have a responsibility to our members of Parliament and say to them, here's what we want. We want Palestinian recognition, and we want you to sort out and hold Israel to account for all the atrocities and the genocide that's going on there.
It's going to be interesting. Gaza Strip is real estate minus Palestinians, possibly, but we'll keep an eye on it. Russia launched a sweeping attack with 500. This is a Ukraine update. Russia launched a sweeping attack with 537 drones, 8 ballistic missiles, and 37 other types of missiles across Ukraine overnight on Saturday, with 1 person killed and 24 injured, including 3 children, when a 5-story residential building was hit in Zaporizhia. The regional governor, Ivan Fedorov, said the attack on Zaporizhia cut power to 25,000 residents. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said 14 regions were targeted, including Kyiv and Chernivtsi in the southwest of the country bordering Romania. The Ukrainian Air Force said it downed 510 of 537 drones and 38 of 45 missiles launched by Russia in the overnight attack. The cities of Dnipro and Pavlograd in the central region of Dnipropetrovsk also came under attack early on Saturday, the regional governor Sergei Lysak said, warning residents to take cover. President Zelensky accused Moscow of using the time meant for preparing a leaders-level meeting to organise new massive attacks and called for tougher banking and energy sanctions on Russia. He said Russia's latest attack had shown its utter disregard for words. The EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, said she had asked the bloc's governments to submit proposals next week for another package of sanctions against Russia after a meeting of the EU foreign minister in Copenhagen. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said he expected that Russia would only stop its war against Ukraine once it could no longer wage it for economic and military reasons, given that diplomatic efforts in recent weeks had failed. On Saturday, the chief of Russia's general staff, Valery Gerasimov, said that Russian forces were waging non-stop offensives along the entire front line in Ukraine and have the strategic initiative. Since March, Russia has captured more than 3,500 square kilometres of territory in Ukraine and taken control of 149 villages, Gerasimov claimed. The Russian Defence Ministry have claimed that Russian troops have taken control of the village of Komishvavka in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region, adding that its forces had successfully carried out strikes with high-precision weapons on Ukrainian missile and aviation enterprises, as well as military airfields in Ukraine. The Ukrainian military said that it had struck Russian oil refineries in Krasnodar and Syzran overnight. The military recorded multiple explosions and a fire at the Krasnodar oil refinery in Russia's south, and said there was also a fire in the Syzran oil refinery area in Samara region. Russian authorities in Krasnodar said falling debris damaged one of the refinery's units. Andriy Paruby, a Ukrainian politician who previously served as the parliament speaker, was shot dead in western city of Lviv on Saturday. The prosecutors have opened a murder investigation and said the police were still searching for the shooter, but have not mentioned possible motives at this stage. President Zelensky said the shooting was carefully planned and that all necessary forces and means would be used in the investigation. The Foreign Minister, Andriy Sybiha, described Paruby as a patriot and statesman who rightfully belongs in the history books, while the Prime Minister, Yulia Sviridenko, called for a prompt investigation of the murder, calling it a profound loss for the country. Huw, this murder on the streets of a city in Ukraine, do you think that Kiev. Sorry.
Lviv.
Lviv. Yeah, I'm sorry. Apologies for all my mispronunciations. Anytime I do a Ukraine update. Does this show that Kamala Harris was right when, in the televised election campaign for the run up to the election to become president of the United States, she told Trump, "Putin's going to eat you for lunch"?
I think Putin's eaten him for lunch, and he's now sitting down to have his pudding. And I think this just goes to show that whatever all of Trump's bluff and bluster, when he comes face to face with somebody who sees him for what he is, then he is useless. He's giving Putin, more days, extra days to come to some decision. The fact that he cannot see the difference between Russia being an aggressor and Ukraine as a victim, that he sees the two of them on, the same level, it's beyond belief. And it's quite telling. I know there's talks between India and China this week, because obviously India and China relations haven't been very good over the years, but they're meeting because of the tariffs that the US have placed on India for them buying Russian oil. But the only country that hasn't had any tariffs put on them by the United States is Russia. And Trump, will all of his tough talk, just doesn't seem to be doing anything, and doesn't seem to be capable. But as I say, going back to that original point, Russia, the aggressor, this war could stop tomorrow if they just stopped attacking Ukraine. It's as simple as that. And that is something that Trump doesn't seem to be able to comprehend.
Thank you, Hugh. Chris, how many courses are there in this lunch that Putin's having at the expense of Trump and Ukraine?
Well, it seems to be an all-day buffet, frankly. And all it wasn't so much bluff and bluster, it was Trump celebrating his diplomatic skills only last week, on how he was the only one who could sort this issue. And I think that's now blown up in his face. And I'm very worried about that situation, and I do think that, as your report says, there's going to have to be some serious discussions about sanctions going forward on Russia.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. The far right, asylum seekers. Last year, Scotland escaped the riots that England witnessed when mobs attacked people and tried to burn down a hotel housing asylum seekers. But in recent months, there have been regular anti-immigrant or anti-asylum seeker protests here in Scotland, in Falkirk and Perth. And there was a particularly odious demonstration in Aberdeen yesterday. Meanwhile, 2 men were charged this month under the Hate Crime Act following a protest outside accommodation used for asylum seekers. The Reform UK leader has said that he would seek to leave the European... Nigel Farage, the Reform UK leader, has said that he would seek to leave the European Convention of Human Rights and repeal the Human Rights Act as part of his proposals to deport hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers. Hugh, so that was a mention to how there's protests, anti-asylum seeking protests here in Scotland. What's the situation like where you are?
Yeah, we're quite fortunate that we don't have any asylum seeker hotels, because I saw the news about Falkirk yesterday, and I think this is one of the things that listening to the news, and the BBC have just become completely complicit in this. They discuss immigration as an issue, as a problem, without actually explaining the context of what's going on. Polling shows that the public believe that the majority of people who come here as immigrants are doing so illegally, when the vast majority are coming here to study or work. So from a Welsh perspective, we're fortunate that we haven't had those protests. But what we're seeing is, we are seeing, Reform, winning on local elections, and their pitch is all about immigration. Talking Wales, we're currently doing a a study looking at two of the poorest, most deprived wards in Wales. There's 1,900 council wards in Wales, and two of the top five are nearby in the Rhondda and in Bridgend County. And what's interesting there is, there's high levels of deprivation. It's, there is an issue around housing, access to health. But these areas, so Caerau, for example, 98.5% of people in the census identified as white, Welsh, British, stroke English. The levels of immigration in these communities is tiny. There is immigration, it can be proven that it isn't the issue, but it's being used as this bogeyman to scare everyone. This is why, cost of living crisis, it's got nothing to do with it. And that's the worrying thing, is that we're not having a discussion about, why these people are coming here, but also the reality as to why people can't get housing and why people can't get hospital appointments, because it's underinvestment. It's nothing to do with immigration.
Thank you, Hugh. Chris, Maggie Chapman was quoted in the National today. She said in Epping earlier this month, protests included current or former members of Homeland, Patriotic Alternative for Britain, Blood and Honour and Combat 18. And Homeland is especially trying to insert themselves into the discourse, she said, but they're not a real driving force. They see these protests as an opportunity to exploit. And I think I'm right in saying that Homeland is a Scottish, they were founded in Scotland.
Well, regardless of whether they were founded, it is quite clear that there are bad faith actors driving a lot of these protests. You saw that in Erskine in the last couple of years. And I would doubt that the majority of people in Falkirk and Aberdeen who are at these protests are actually local people. I think the concern I have around all of this, and it's touching on what Hugh has said, is there is a lack of clear moral leadership at the heart of the UK government to take this issue on. The people who are driving this, and that includes politicians in Reform, and indeed an alarming number of Conservative MPs when they were in government, could not tell you the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee. They didn't understand the concept that if you actually have safe and legal routes in order for people to claim asylum, that you can actually deal with their applications quicker because you have more information. They didn't understand that at all. I've got a real concern about the whole discourse around this debate and that human beings are being told they're illegal. There's no such thing as an illegal human being. We need some moral leadership as to why people are seeking sanctuary, and often they're seeking sanctuary because of events that the Western world has caused. They are seeking sanctuary because of climate change issues. They're seeking sanctuary because they're in fear of their lives if they stay in their country of origin. These are facts. And as someone who dealt with asylum seekers on a weekly basis and daily basis, actually, we're able to understand these issues. We also need to take on the view and the complete lie that people who are in hotels are getting a life of luxury when they clearly aren't. They're not getting the same catering and meals that would be available to other hotel guests if the hotels were open to other people. I actually think there is a debate to be had about whether keeping people in hotels is the correct policy at all, because you have a number of people who are seeking sanctuary because of what they went through in their lives, have serious mental health challenges and mental health issues because they have seen things in their lives that none of us watching and none of us in the studio can even contemplate. So I am pleased that John Swinney started to take this on by saying that he's sick of Westminster politicians using this and using this issue to mask their own failures. And that does include, as we'll probably come on to, the cost of living challenges. It's not the fault of someone seeking sanctuary in the UK that tax avoidance is at £90 billion, and that's a Conservative estimate. It's not the fault of those seeking sanctuary that the Department of Work and Pensions has pays people in error. It's not the fault of sanctuary seekers that private energy companies are ramping up and being allowed to ramp up the prices on the cost of electricity and gas. So we need a comprehensive take on this, and to challenge the arguments and to show moral leadership. And unfortunately, we're not going to see that with Keir Starmer, because unfortunately, I just see both the Conservative Party and the British Labour Party pandering to reform rather than taking them on and confronting them.
Thank you, Chris. Huw, Nigel Farage, he announced his plans to ditch the ECHR, that's the European Convention on Human Rights, at a speech that he gave last week. Keir Starmer, as far as I know, is yet to condemn Farage's plan to ditch the ECHR. John Swinney, the First Minister of Scotland, said in response to Farage's speech, every time living standards fall, Nigel Farage blames migration, and every time Keir Starmer just nods along. Is the First Minister right?
Yeah, completely. And it's strange that, what is going on within Labour, because Labour was the party that would have been standing up for these people, only a few years back. I don't know if you saw, there was an opinion poll out yesterday, and, the worrying thing, it had, Reform at 35%. But it had the Conservatives at 17%. So it looks as though 52% of the UK populace, we have to remember that 82% of those live in England, would vote for two mad right-wing parties. Because the Conservatives are in a mess under Badenoch, and Farage, basically, they've got immigration and net zero. That's all they've got. And yeah, Starmer it's appalling that he's not speaking out, but also, that there aren't any more Labour politicians speaking out, because it is a dangerous position, because people, because Ryan Clark was pilloried for being on ITV this week, and in fairness to him, not that I'm defending him, he said that we're being fed this notion that they're getting iPads, 3 square meals a day, while people, and I think that's what people have forgotten about. What he was saying is that people have been fed this. He was repeating stuff that that is out there, that is thought to be, what people think is common knowledge and fact about these people. But it's this othering, that somebody is having something that they're not having. The people were saying, why are these people in hotels when there are homeless veterans on the street? Well, yeah, why are there homeless veterans on the street? Let's look at that and let's come up with a solution to it. But the fact that there are people, from seeking asylum in hotels, has got nothing to do with that. But it is this thing that they're thinking that these people are getting something some other people should be getting. And it's just this disconnect that people's understanding of how the world works is just, I don't know, it is deeply worrying. But the fact that, you've got over half of the UK population willingly saying they're going to vote for either of those two parties is a concern. And of course, under first past the post, that Labour have fought against for years, there is a real chance that with 30-35% of the vote, Reform could get a majority in Westminster. And imagine the disaster. Farage as Prime Minister, and the God knows, we've seen the state. They elected 6 MPs. 2 of them are no longer Reform MPs. One has left and set up his own further right-wing party, and the other one is under investigation for fraud. And unfortunately for them, he's the one that has a conviction for assaulting a woman. So, they're going on about, and this is the bizarre thing, you've got Reform people saying that, I mentioned on, I think it was on X or something the other day, that statistically you're more likely to be attacked as a woman by a Reform MP than you are, by an immigrant or an asylum seeker. But then the answer was, oh, he's no longer a Reform MP. As if, that was a good thing, that the only reason he isn't one is because he's facing fraud allegations. But this is, it's a cult. They don't want to see the facts. They've got this vision in their head that, people from foreign lands that are a certain colour, and basically it's anti-Islamic, and I think that's the thing that we don't sort of discuss enough. It's an ideological thing. It's the Islamic side of things that people are against and being racist about. It's worrying.
Thank you, Hugh. I listened, I heard Rylan talking about 4-star hotels, but I've since seen photographs of these hotels. There's a room with 2 sets of bunk beds and a sheet between them, so it's not 4-star hotels, anything but. But we're told that, to me this feels like Brexit 0.2. We're told that Farage's plans to scrap the rights in the ECHR, which would include things like the right not to be tortured or enslaved, the right to liberty and security, the right to education, the right to free elections, the right to freedom of thought, the right to freedom of expression and assembly, the abolition of the death penalty, otherwise known as the right not to be murdered by the state, equality between spouses. I mean, these are the kind of things that Farage is talking about getting rid of. And people are also saying that if we get rid of if Britain leaves the ECHR, then it could accelerate the end of the Union, with the Good Friday Agreement being breached.
Well, that's very much a possibility, very much so. But we need to keep tackling why people are voting for reform, because it's not just the racists who are doing it. There is a lot of disaffected voters who are taking the view that they don't believe that other political parties are for them or representing them, and that's something we need to be aware of and take on and challenge. And that's what we have to do. But we really need to, I'm very concerned about the rise of the far right and what that could mean. And when I speak to Labour MPs, and particularly in the northeast of England, they're very concerned at the atmosphere at the moment. And they're very concerned at the number of people voting for reform. But we need to take on the issues and fight them on the issues and not pander to them. That, I think, is a lesson.
Thank you, Chris. Last week, Kemi Badenoch said that she wants to drill the North Sea dry. Which is straight from Trump's book of Drill Baby Drill. Then on Wednesday, Ofgem announced that it was raising the energy price cap by 2%, increasing bills for households across the UK and hitting the pockets of the poorest people in the UK. Meanwhile, in Scotland, where energy charges are higher and winters are colder. Chris, I think it's you this time. Would Badenoch's plan to increase North Sea oil production see energy bills in Scotland come down?
Well, I think that what really should happen here, and I'll come back to oil exploration at the moment, but I cannot understand for the life of me why the Labour government isn't doing what they've done in the past, which was say to the private energy companies, there's a windfall tax on your profits, and until you cut prices down, we're going to keep coming for your profits. Now, some of the profits these private energy companies are making are absolutely extortionate. They're ridiculous. And this is what Blair and Brown did. And what they did was that they then fed that money into employment support schemes. Now, it seems that something similar could happen right now. They're getting away with things that they shouldn't be getting away with, the private energy companies. Ofgem are toothless, frankly, from what I can see. In any interaction I had with them when I was an MP, completely and utterly toothless, and not taking on the private energy companies and allowing them to ramp up prices. That's what I think we need to have the real discussion on, is why the private energy companies get away with this. Now, I would of course prefer to see a state-owned energy company. That's what Labour were trying to hoodwink people into believing that GB Energy was supposed to be, but it's not that at all. So we need to, I think, start thinking about how we get the corporate interests and take on the corporate interests who are making mass profits, and that includes the supermarkets, by the way, and the energy companies who are directly responsible for the rise in inflation, which is food prices and energy prices, and why they're driving up prices. Because I'll tell you, the public aren't prepared to put up with it any longer. And, perhaps we might have to do, as that cartoon once said, that perhaps every Thursday we should clap the energy companies and no pay them, because that's what the Tories were doing to nurses during the COVID pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Hugh, these price caps from Ofgem are coming around about every 3 months. This isn't the first one at all, which kind of gives the impression that the market's broken and needs reform. Labour so far seem to just be blaming these prices on the previous Tory administration. How likely is it that Starmer's Labour government in Westminster is going to reform the broken energy market?
Well, this is the thing that I just don't understand. A year ago, Starmer was elected with a massive majority that basically enables him to do whatever he wants to do. But he seems to be incapable of doing anything. And you've got Rachel Reeves, who's got these set of fiscal rules, who is trying to portray herself as the sensible, almost like Iron Lady, looking after the finances. When you listen to people like Martin Lewis, the money saving expert, who is explaining, he's doing a better job of explaining what's going on here than anybody in the government is doing. The whole thing needs to be reformed. The chief executive, the owner of Octopus Energy, he's made some really interesting comments. They're one of the sort of fastest growing energy companies in the UK, and even he's saying that the system is broken. But remember, we're going back as well, talking about reform. Remember that reform are getting a lot of their financial backing from the oil and gas industry, and I would imagine from a Conservative point of view, they have been as well. And I think their actions are probably more to do with the fact that they're scared of losing, finances to reform from their current backers. But there was a report out last week that was discussing the collapse of the Atlantic currents. I think it's called the AOCM, AMOC, and basically, if that collapses, then the consequences for the world are huge. But again, it comes down to rising levels of CO2, and it needs to be addressed. But everybody seems to be, with net zero again. It's been made this bogeyman that it's the reason that everything is bad. The reason net zero exists is we need to do it in order to save the planet. And if people can't get their heads around that, it's incredible. And it's just the short-termism that people like Farage and Tice are willing to, sacrifice basically our children and grandchildren's futures for, a bit of power and a bit of money now. It's astonishing.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. I often ask people on here, how bad does it have to get before people pay attention and make changes? Chris, Keir Starmer, when he got into power, he brought in a Scottish MP, Michael Shanks, as an energy minister. Do you think, was he being canny when he did that because Scotland's energy rich, so it kind of makes sense, or is he trolling us?
Well, it's probably an element of both, to be fair. But to be fair to Michael, he was probably the only Labour candidate at the last general election that could give you some understanding of what GB Energy was supposed to be. For me, it goes back to, and I think what's more important here, and something that Hugh touched on, which reminded me of this, is that those of us who watch what the Labour Party are up to since the election always say there's always a tweet or there's always an interview. And it just came out, I remember seeing it last night, was that actually Keir Starmer was very, very specific during the general election campaign. He said, and there's a television interview, and people can can look at it and research it themselves, is he said that from day one there would be no increases in energy prices. From day one, the first thing the Labour government would do is that there'd be no increases at all in energy prices. And that is, yet again, another broken promise, which is why there are people in parts of the United Kingdom who are running to reform. It's one of the reasons that's driving that, is that a broken promise on things like cost of living, and they really do need to get a grip. But again, I just do not understand why there's not more of a conversation about the profits of energy companies and why that's not coming out the public purse.
Thank you, Chris. Huw, up here in Scotland, I suppose the question is, like, could a Scottish government, doesn't have to be an SNP government, but could an independent Scottish government do a better job of reforming the energy markets and bringing bills down? Would you say the same of the Senate? Could the Senate do a better job if it was independent?
Well, you would think, you couldn't do anything any worse than what's happening at the moment. Because obviously one of the issues in Wales is a lot of the, because we're generating more power than we're actually consuming. So obviously, we're exporting energy into England. We also have to remember that, the biggest chunk of energy from Wales is still, 30% is coming from one gas-fired power station. And, in the dock in Milford Haven is one of the biggest locations in the UK for taking in liquid natural gas. So, yeah, no, definitely. But, there's potential now. We know, we've got inland wind farms that, generating electricity. There's a lot of concern around, the pylons that take that power out. And there is talk, of compensating people locally. But that is the issue. We look at energy prices in Wales and Scotland being higher than in other parts of the UK, is because we've got, remote communities. So of course it's going to cost more to get electricity to some people as opposed to London, where, obviously everybody's living within a condensed space. But, we've got potential for, huge wind farm in the sea off the south-west coast of Wales. But the big issue there is any profits that are made from those wind farms go to the royal family, because unlike Scotland, the Crown Estate in Wales isn't devolved. And, Labour Senedd members have said, every single council in Wales has said that, the Crown Estate needs to be devolved. But Westminster in London, Labour in London, are telling us they know better. Oh no, it's not a priority. There are more important things to be getting on with. So it is a big issue. But as I say, Scotland and Wales, energy from both countries is needed in order to power the kettles of 84% of the UK population that live in England. And we're not seeing any benefits from supplying that power. It's all going one way. We're not getting anything back. It's almost like going back to, when the coal industry and the slate industry in Wales, it's all extracted and we're not seeing the benefits of it.
Thank you, Huw. Chris, more or less the same question to you. Could a Scottish government, doesn't have to be SNP, but in an independent Scotland, do a better job of reforming the energy market and bringing prices down?
Well, it would control its own resources, so yes. And as Huw says, it really couldn't do any worse than the complete and utter mess that the UK government's made of the energy market. What I found staggering was when the Octopus chief executive guy was explaining zonal pricing and how Scotland should actually be paying less. That the Labour government, and I think it was Michael Shanks actually, was bitterly opposed to that, because that would mean that the reason they wouldn't do it is because people in Scotland would be paying lower energy prices than other people in the United Kingdom. Just crazy. So yes, of course it could, and I think that this is part of what the pitch should be next year. It's very simple. How come a country like Denmark, a population of a similar size to Scotland, has the lowest energy prices in Europe, and Scotland, similar size of population to Denmark, has one of the highest. I think people can work it out. It's whether you're independent or not.
Thank you, Chris. Excuse me. The Scottish Greens say change is coming as new Green co-leaders Gillian Mackay and Ross Greer warn polluters and the super rich that the days of a wealthy few benefiting from a rigged system are numbered. I've got some notes here about the Scottish Greens, which I haven't lined up properly, forgive me. Gillian Mackay is 34, Ross Greer is 31. They're the new leaders of the Scottish Greens. They've replaced Lawrence Slater and Patrick Harvey. The new leaders have vowed to put hope back into independence, or the fight for independence. And Chris, earlier on you mentioned a wealth tax, and here we have the Greens saying that they're going to sort of tax the rich. What do you think of the new leaders, the new Green leaders?
Well, I think if you look at it dispassionately, I think that one of the challenges the Greens are going to have is that, and Hugh touched on this earlier, is that I think that politics, particularly at constituent level and particularly in the first past the post element of elections in Scotland, is a very congested field. And what the Greens are going to have to do is, in order to get success, is they are going to have to make themselves distinctive. And I think one of the challenges they might actually have is what happens with the creation of, let's call it the Corbyn Sultana Party, or currently called the Your Party. Because I can see people who vote Green would also be attracted to vote for the Corbyn Sultana Party. Because the Green Party's pitch, they have attracted voters across the range in terms of none of the above. I think some of them are going back to Lib Dem. They attract, obviously, SNP supporters in relation to the regional list vote, but obviously whether they get as much as that as they have in the past, I'm not sure, given some of the events of the last couple of years. So I think that, like all political parties, they will have good ideas. We'll see how distinctive they can make themselves. And obviously what Ross and Gillian will have to do is they will have to make sure that they impose themselves into the public consciousness. So I think it's a wait and see for me. I think that there is always going to be a debate, I suppose, as to how much they kick the SNP and how much they support the SNP. Those debates are happening within the Green Party itself. So I think for me it's a wait and see, but any good ideas that any political party puts forward, I think we should always look at them and debate them.
Thank you. Hugh, how does it work for the Greens in Wales? I think they've got a different structure there.
Yeah, it's the England and Wales Green Party, so they're not a separate party. They do have separate leadership, so Anthony Slaughter has been the leader of the Greens since 2018. He's been re-elected a couple of times. I know Anthony's a very good man, and they are making sort of inroads in the capital in Cardiff. They recently won a by-election, taking a seat off Labour in a traditional Labour seat, and they're on course to win at least one seat in the Senedd elections, Cardiff South. It looks like they're on course to win that one. Obviously, with the proportional representation, they're going to need 12% of the vote in the regional seats. So obviously that is one, in Cardiff, they've got the capability of doing that, and sort of leading the poll there. But across the rest of Wales, it's going to be harder for them. There has been, a history of Plaid Cymru and the Green Party working together. I think people forget the first Green Party MP. It was actually a Plaid Cymru stroke Green Party MP, Cynnog Davies, many years ago in Ceredigion. So yeah, I think it is interesting. But again, they do get criticism in Wales. for being, so England and Wales not being a separate entity. But I think it is something that the Green Party in Wales realise is something they need to address.
Thank you, Hugh. Chris, just briefly, do you think we're going to see another SNP Green agreement like the Butte House agreement now that we've got new leadership?
No, I think we're going to see an SNP majority government, and that's what we should be going for. That's what we should continue to aim for, because that's the only way that the Westminster government will listen and give us a referendum.
Thank you. So the next item is, what has the Scottish Government ever done for Scotland? In the week that the Scottish Government completed the transfer of all 350,000 PIP payments to the Scottish Adult Disability Payment, John Swinney said that independence is the fresh start that Scotland needs, as he pointed to the achievements of the Scottish Government. Among the achievements the First Minister listed were record numbers of hip and knee operations performed last year, a steep increase in paramedic recruitment, exam results recovering to pre-pandemic levels, Scotland's share of inward investment increased to the highest in the UK outside London, and peak rail fares will be permanently abolished in Scotland as of tomorrow morning. Chris, it only seems fair to come to you first. Usually when the First Minister talks about how well his government is doing, it's baby boxes and child poverty, but it seems there's a lot more to that.
Well, no, there is, and I don't think that we talk enough about what we're doing and our successes, mainly because we have a poor mainstream media who like to tell us how terrible everything is, presumably because that sells newspapers. We need to do more of this, and you've just listed some really important ones. Now, why is it important that 350,000 PIP claimants were transferred to the Scottish Adult Disability Payment? Because they wouldn't have been subjected to the PIP cuts that the Westminster government were trying to impose on people. This ridiculous situation where you had the Labour Party, the British Labour Party, saying to disabled people, we're cutting the state support for you. So that was important why the Scottish Government did that, because that was, and that might be something, because I've read today that there are government ministers saying that so-called welfare reform isn't over, and they're going to look at other things. So that was an important thing to do. The peak rail fare issue will help a lot of working people getting to and from work. And it'll make it, and that will help them with cost of living pressures. So that's really important. And we need to do more of that. I mean, I'm just thinking, in one of the wards that I represented, just how much the Scottish Government had put into an organisation called Swamp, who are doing fantastic work with youth. Gave them a lot of money to redevelop a building and to make it a centre for arts and music and other activities, community activities. Fantastic work being done there. A project close to my heart, the Three Hills Community Supermarket, that came from Scottish Government money, and that's a project that's going very, very well in terms of helping people with basic food costs and the cost of living. And again, another community space that's being utilised. We need to keep pushing this as about and talk up our successes, because people aren't. We didn't do it enough last year, and we certainly need to do it heading into next year. Is to talk about not just how things are better in Scotland, but the real benefits that we're delivering for people. Because I think it's a story that we don't say enough about.
Thank you, Chris. Hugh, just before I ask you your question, just a couple of finer details. There's also a £3.6 million startup fund being allocated in Scotland. I think the government had said that the startup would be 1.2 million, but now they're going to make it up to 3.6. When I talked about inward investment in Scotland being the highest in the UK, it's been the highest in the UK for 10 years. And that point about there being more qualified paramedics in Scotland, in 2020 there were 24 new qualified paramedics in Scotland. In 2025, this year alone, there's been 181. I'm just wondering, how does the Labour government in the Senate compare? Do they have a similar list of achievements?
I wish I could say yes. But frankly, and I think this is something again that isn't done enough. The comparison between Scotland and Wales, how Scotland has performed under the SNP versus how Wales has performed under Labour. Chris mentioned there, I would imagine almost every single metric you measure things by, Scotland is doing better than Wales. So when you have Labour MSPs doing the SNP bad, we need change, and we saw what happened with the general election, and people were duped into it. But the reality is, we've seen in Wales 24 years of Labour in power, and people are despairing. Poverty is rising. Child poverty is set to rise to just under 40% in the next sort of 10 years. Things are really, really bad. They have done, one good thing they brought in was the 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. That was brought in, quite over a year ago, and it's something that faced a lot of backlash. It was the comms around it were handled badly. Lots of the right wing were saying that it was sort of nanny statism. The facts are that there are fewer children being killed and fewer children having serious injuries on roads in Wales. So that is a good thing. But yeah, no, I'm surprised that the comparison between Wales and Scotland isn't made more often. Obviously, Scotland has more devolved powers, but around things like health and education, they're pretty evenly matched from a powers perspective, and Scotland is doing better. Ironically, the curriculum in Wales is changing, or has been changing over the last couple of years, and we're following a curriculum model that was being developed in Scotland. So we're slightly behind the curve from an education point of view, but hopefully the benefits of that will start coming through as they have done in Scotland.
Thank you, Hugh. Chris, earlier on you talked about the disability living allowance and how that was rescuing benefits that were under risk from the Labour government in Westminster. Forgive me, but it's more than just cash and figures coming from the Scottish government, isn't it? They've brought in, since the Scottish government's taken over this Social Security Scotland, they've brought in a new approach which is much more compassionate, and where fairness is central to their approach, isn't it? Is that right?
Well, yes, I remember when I was on the DWP Select Committee. The Select Committee came up to Glasgow, and we had a meeting with Social Security Scotland, and I think that MPs from other parts of the UK were absolutely blown away by the question at the end when you're applying for something, which is, how do you feel you've been treated in this process? Completely revolutionary to these folk, but when you think about it, it's basic stuff. Is that if you're asking people to fill out a form, you're asking people to fill out, you ask them how they feel about the process, seems to be fairly simple. So there is compassion. Obviously, I think that there was always going to be a period of more people applying, and I think that that's a good thing, because what's interesting about that is that when we're seeing these changes, we're seeing the poverty stats in Scotland are lower than other parts of the United Kingdom. Now, I want to see poverty eradicated everywhere in the world, and there's still a lot more to be done. But it shows that something's obviously working if the poverty figures in Scotland are lower than they are in other parts of the United Kingdom. And it is about having, I think, the story we need to develop for next year should be that civic nationalist one of, here is what we've done and here's what we want to do. We're not saying enough of, here's what we've done and here's how we've made things better, because it gets back to the narrative of why reform are rising. Is because people are being fed this line that things are crap everywhere, and they're not crap everywhere. There's a lot of challenges, of course there is. There's things that could be better, of course there is. And we need to merge all of that together.
Thank you, Chris. Hugh, I don't know if it's the same in Wales, but up here when this kind of topic is raised in the media and about the SNP and how well they're doing, and it is always, the first go-to is always baby boxes and how well they're doing on child poverty. It seems almost as if people start to roll their eyes and go, oh, it really is, but what is there in here? But so social security is devolved to Scotland. Is it devolved to the Senate?
You know, there's far less fiscal controls. That's one of the things in Wales, because basically, you know, it's health, education, and transport are the main ones. So there is potential to do it. One of the things that Plaid Cymru want to do at the next election is to sort of alleviate poverty, and by doing so, just the fact that scrapping the two-child limit. But again, that's a Westminster thing, and it's something that they want to do here. So I think there's a lot to be done as well, and I think it's the same in Scotland. I think people don't realise that there are limitations with devolution, and it's unfair to sort of criticise devolved governments because they have got limited powers, and especially when it comes to things like borrowing. So to invest in things that can actually make a difference to people's lives, then a lot of that is still held in Westminster. And the frustrating thing is, yes, it's good if Westminster spend more money on health or education, because that money then comes to Wales and we decide what to do with that money. But we only get extra money if England decides to do that, and we can't decide, well, we need to spend more on this as a priority. So again, it's just the way that I think a lot of people just don't understand how devolution works, because the limitations that it has. But no, in Wales we don't have the same abilities to do things. And even if we did, the current Labour government that have been in since 25 years don't have the capability of delivering it.
Thank you, Hugh. I mean, you often say that to us, Hugh, here. Even earlier on, you talked about the Crown Estates, how that's not devolved in Wales. Social Security, it turns out, isn't devolved in Wales. Why aren't the devolved governments all given equal powers, in your opinion?
I think the biggest reason is the SNP, because the SNP were strong prior, to the devolution, and I think Westminster saw the rise of the SNP and the potential for Scottish independence. Scotland received more powers. Obviously, there are elements as well. The fact that Scotland has its own legal system was helpful, because that's one of the things. We want devolution of justice to Wales, and again, we're not allowed to have it by Labour, even though it was part of a recommendation from an independent report written and supported by Labour Senate members. I think Scotland benefited. If it wasn't for the rise of the SNP, I don't think Scotland would have had the powers. And it's the same as well with investment in the BBC. So there's been big investment in the BBC from a news perspective because of the fear of the SNP and independence. That hasn't happened in Wales because they haven't seen Plaid Cymru and independence as a threat until probably now, with Plaid Cymru and Reform leading the polls in Wales.
Thank you, Hugh. Chris, you were an SNP MP, yeah? So it's all your fault.
Well, it's not, but not as far as Wales is concerned, because of course I'm a Plaid Cymru member of good standing as well. I think we often talked about forming a Glasgow branch. That's maybe something we can come back to on another occasion. No, I think that there's a lot of interesting dynamics when I talk to Plaid Cymru members. I mean, I think that some of the political challenges Wales have is also basic geography. Is that I still remember the story of standing at Chester Station, and my wife insisted that the Holyhead train was the one that would get me to Llangollen, and it wasn't. It was actually the Wolverhampton train, because it was a semicircle. So I think I think that Plaid haven't developed probably as much because I think Scotland obviously has a border and everything north is Scotland, whereas in Wales there's more interconnection with with England on all sorts of things. We're very much sympathetic to Hugh's cause about devolving justice, looking at some of those things, because there will be things in Wales which are being provided for by outsourced companies because it's an England-Wales arrangement that just wouldn't happen in Scotland.
Thank you, Chris, and better not get Hugh started on the railways, because he's spoken about that often here, and we better let you get back to what's left of the weekend. We're out of time, but so that's it for this week's Full Scottish. But before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on your generosity. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view, you know that, but if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or please simply donate whatever you can afford. So thank you again to our guests, to Chris here in the studio. Thank you for coming in live on a Sunday afternoon, and thank you to you, Hugh, as well, for coming in from Wales, and thank you to you at home for watching. Goodbye.